morning, and welcome to Rising. Happy Monday. We are back at it again, me and my boy Niall Stanage. Nice to see you, my friend.
Glad to be back with you, Robby, after a week's vacation for me, which I enjoyed in my native Ireland and Britain.
And you unplugged, I hear.
I unplugged from mostly all online content, read print newspapers like an old man.
What are those?
I think I was about the only person reading them, but it was an enjoyable time off, but I'm glad to be back with you. So why don't you get us started? What is on your radar, Robby?
Let's get right to it. I think we might fight over this one. It'll be fun. The knives are out for Senator John Fetterman. The Pennsylvania Democrat is popular in his home state and well-liked by many independents, moderates, and even Republicans. But he is loathed by progressive Democrats and the left. Now the mainstream media is turning on him with a level of malice not evinced by them since, well, Joe Biden's cognitive collapse during the presidential debate caused the MSM to revolt overnight against their preferred candidate. Indeed, Fetterman's situation bears remarkable similarity to the Biden situation. Both men have been credibly accused of health-related, or in Biden's case, age-related, cognitive impairments that might render them not fit for government work. But as with Biden, the question you should be asking is this: why now? Why is it suddenly okay to scrutinize Fetterman's fitness for public service? Recall that when conservatives raised questions about Fetterman's condition back in 2022, I was one of them, when he was running for Senate against Republican Dr. Oz, the media covered for him at every turn. They held up his perseverance as brave. They treated it as admirable that he was sticking it out despite obvious impairment. What changed since then? I think I know, and I bet you do too. But let's back up a little bit. You probably all remember back in 2022, while running for the crucial Senate seat in the swing state of Pennsylvania, that Fetterman suffered a stroke. It was obvious that this was a serious blow to the senator's health and had left him verbally impaired at the very least. In his subsequent debate with Republican opponent Dr. Oz, Fetterman had trouble speaking in complete sentences. Let's flash back for a moment.
Just a second, Mr. Oz. I do want to clarify something. You're saying tonight that you support fracking, that you've always supported fracking, but there is that 2018 interview that you said, quote, "I don't support fracking at all." So how do you square the two?
I do support fracking, and I support fracking, and I stand and I do support fracking.
It was painful to watch. Biden's catastrophic debate performance in July 2024 looks Churchillian by comparison, and it's why I said at the time that I didn't possibly see how Fetterman could continue with his campaign. He was clearly not up for taking on such a demanding job. Nevertheless, Fetterman won the race and was elected to the Senate. Today, Fetterman's health is once again a topic of discussion because of a recent profile of him, some would say hit piece, in New York Magazine. We discussed it on Rising last week, but since then, media chatter about that piece has increased, prompting much subsequent discussion and take-having among the pundit class. Indeed, Axios took New York Magazine's ball and ran with it, publishing a report that claims, quote, Capitol Hill's private concerns over Fetterman exploded into public view over the past week as longtime critics and former allies piled on with concerns about the senator. The main originator of the anti-Fetterman campaign is Adam Gentleson, a former chief of staff who was the primary source for the New York Magazine article. Most of the other sources in that piece were unnamed staffers. You know, it's really amazing to me that when they really want to, mainstream reporters seem to have no trouble finding political insiders who are willing to speak up about their boss's alleged cognitive decline. Again, we're supposed to believe that Biden's infirmity was this closely guarded secret and that the media was totally bamboozled by it. That just doesn't seem totally plausible, given how easily mainstream reporters seem to find aggrieved staffers to spout off when they set their mind to it. Now look, I'm perfectly willing to believe that Fetterman is still reeling from his stroke or the subsequent depression he suffered, and ultimately should not be in the Senate. Okay, but here's the thing. The media organizations that are now insistent that something is wrong mentally with John Fetterman are the very same ones that went to the mat 3 years ago to protect Fetterman at all costs. They didn't just cover for his health problems, they hailed him as brave for continuing to run anyway. For instance, The Atlantic is now slamming Fetterman's defenders for ignoring evidence that he is, quote, unfit for office. But back in 2022, immediately after the stroke, The Atlantic ran an article cheering Fetterman on. It was called The Survivor Vote, How John Fetterman's Stroke Helped Deepen His Everyman Appeal Among Some Supporters. They were spinning his stroke as nearly a positive development. Rolling Stone, same thing, reported at the time that the stroke was no big deal. Plenty of politicians needed medical treatment in the past. You'll have to take my word for it, but that broadly was characteristic of the media coverage at the time. Fetterman is fine. What are you even talking about? Everything is fine. Vote Democrat. Which brings us back to the initial question, what changed? We all know in the years since he was first elected to the Senate, Fetterman has turned out to be much more moderate than expected. He's not a progressive, he's cordial with Trump and the GOP, and perhaps most relevant of all, he is firmly and decisively on the side of Israel. This has estranged him from the progressive left and their allies in mainstream media, as well as his progressive staff, and apparently his own wife, Giselle Fetterman, who is much more liberal than he is. And so it's open season on Fetterman. Now, I'm not saying Fetterman's political views are the correct ones, although I will note his move to the right had made him more popular in his home state, not less. If his re-election was held today, he'd probably win by an even more comfortable margin. Nor am I saying that you should ignore evidence of mental incapacity, even if it's being presented opportunistically and in bad faith. What I am saying is that all of this reveals more about our media class than it does about Fetterman specifically. Once again, evidence of infirmity was selectively and conveniently ignored by the mainstream media, until such ignorance no longer served the interests of the Democratic Party. This is why so many Americans don't trust them.
Provocative, Robby, but we're certainly going to get off to a robust start.
Let me have it, Niall. And again, and I just want to make clear, I'm not asserting that he is fine and he is fit for office. I don't know that for certain. I had questions years ago about him. So I am not defending, I'm not going to do the Biden thing, but I do find it a little hypocritical how the knives are out for him now. What do you think?
First of all, I think in general it is almost always better to have more information than less information. The nature of political journalism in particular is that sources often have mixed motives at best for saying things, but having that information allows viewers, readers, whatever, to make judgments for themselves. So is the information accurate? Is John Fetterman now prone to sort of repetitive or paranoid ramblings, as is suggested? Is he off his treatment plan? Those are relevant things. Now, as for the media critique, I think here's where I think I have the biggest difference with the case you laid out, which is I don't think it is fair or accurate to say that the media covered for Fetterman first time around. When he was campaigning, the big exhibition of his problems was the debate that we played a brief clip from. Look, I looked up some of the headlines from that. AP's headline, Fetterman struggles in Senate debate against Oz after stroke. Axios's headline, Fetterman's painful debate. CNN's first sentence, Democrat John Fetterman's debate performance has intensified the focus on his recovery from a stroke. So in the same way as Biden's debate really sharpened all these questions, I think the Fetterman Senate debate did so, and the media covered it appropriately at the time.
There was very little criticism from fellow Democrats at the time, perhaps, the way there is now for him. And I think it has to do with him no longer being seen as a useful implement for them, given that his views are much more right-wing than they expected.
Well, I mean, they're certainly much more on the Israel question. I mean, one of the things that people like me have a grievance against him for isn't merely being pro-Israel. It's for expressing a kind of glee about the suffering of the Palestinians. That has certainly alienated him from considerable numbers of people in the Democratic camp. I don't know what Adam Gentelson's motives are, whether they are pure, impure, or somewhere in between. But I don't think we disagree that it is in the public interest to know that people have fears about John Fetterman's fitness for office.
I have a hard time believing he's in worse shape now than he was then. That's the difficulty I have with this, because he was not able to communicate on a basic level when he was running for the Senate seat after the stroke, which was an unfortunate thing. It came out of nowhere. I'm not blaming anyone for backing Fetterman up until that point, and then it was an uncomfortable situation where, like, I don't know what you do, but I don't know how this person can serve in the Senate. And then he actually recovered from that speaking incapacitation to a greater degree than I necessarily expected. And now they say he's evincing all these other cognitive issues. It just seems, well, it's not as bad as it was then.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just think it's good that we know these things and we can evaluate it, and Fetterman has denied that there's any problem, and we'll take it from there. I'm just not sure it's a media conspiracy.
Fair enough.
In any event, next up on Rising, the White House is looking at suspending habeas corpus. Are they going too far? Stick with us.